Hey everyone, tarekith here, and today I want to talk about the Elektron Digitakt 2. Mostly just covering some of my favorite features and functionality of this unit now that I've used it for a few months. I've done a couple live sets with this. Just recently made a video of one of my live performances that I'm super happy with. So I definitely feel very, very comfortable on this device now and feel like I can talk about, what I like about it, what I don't like about it. Although we're mostly going to focus on the good stuff this time around. I'll admit when the first Digitakt came out, I wasn't really interested in it that much. I've been a long time Octatrack user. It's been the backbone of my live set since it was first released. And having kind of a cut down box on the Digitakt 1 that, only did 8 tracks of mono sampling didn't really interest me that much. There wasn't that much sample storage on board and all the rest of the limitations we all know about. However, with the Digitakt 2, Elektron remedied a lot of those things. We have a 20 gigabyte plus drive in here. That's a lot of samples you can store to use later. We have 16 tracks of stereo sample support now. That's really big for me these days, the 16 tracks. Like I said, I love the Octatrack. It's been a core part of my live sets. Most of my live sets for the last couple of years have only used the Octatrack, but only having 8 tracks available, and for me only 6 tracks because I lose 2 for the transition trick I do. To transition from between songs, and I'll leave a link to that in the description if you're curious how that works as an Octatrack user. Only having 6 tracks for my live sets, can be a little limiting for sure. So when the Digitakt 2 came out, I was super interested in it. And I have to admit, it did surprise me quite a bit. It was way more fully featured than I was expecting. In a lot of ways, I kind of feel like Elektron's learned from all their previous devices and kind of put, all their best functionality and features here in the Digitakt 2. So without further ado, let's put it on the desk and I can show you in closer detail some of the things that stood out to me as being really useful from like a live performance standpoint and just a general songwriting standpoint. Okay, so here we are zoomed in a little closer so you can see what I'm talking about as I demonstrate some of the stuff I like a lot about the Digitakt 2. Let's start with the big one for me. How easy it is to sample on the hardware itself. I expected when I bought this box I would be prepping all my samples on the computer and then transfer them to the Digitakt via the Elektron transfer software, and then doing all my writing just by sequencing those samples on the device itself. What I didn't realize was just how easy it was to sample and how quickly it is to actually assign those samples to a track and just keep writing. So much so they actually went out and bought Arturia MiniFreak just so I had like a small keyboard to play into this to do all my sampling from. So what's great about this is, I'm not stuck with like a rigid sequencing grid. I can actually play things in real time. If I have a little bit of slop or a little bit of human emotion in there, that'll get captured as I actually record my samples. So let me demonstrate what I'm talking about. To sample, you just press the sample button. Here you can set all your kind of pre-sampling parameters. You can do threshold sampling. You can have sampling quantized when you press play. There's all different ways you can do sampling on this unit. I like to do it just kind of triggering it manually. So right now I've got it set to it'll record for 8 bars once I trigger sampling by pressing the S button. This is kind of how I work. This isn't how you have to work, but this just works for me. So I'm going to go ahead and start playback. This is an 8-bar pattern, and once the pattern loops back to the first bar, I'll trigger yes and start recording. This is the sound I'm going to use, and I'm going to get a little bit of a tail going ahead of time. Now we're recording, so I pressed yes. Okay, so after 8 bars, it stops recording automatically. If you like it, you hit yes. If you don't like it, want to try again, you hit function no. I like it, I'm going to hit yes. That brings me to the next thing I like a lot about the Digitakt 2. It's got an auto name feature. So you're going to set the setup button and it'll generate like a random name every time. This is great if you're working quickly and recording a lot of loops and you don't want to have to stop to like name things manually. You can just keep pressing this till you get something that works pretty good. Let's see, encrusted, whatever. I like that, I'll hit yes. It's going to save that. And then it'll ask me what track I want to assign the sample to. You don't have to do this, you can skip it, but let's say I want to try and assign it to track 15. There we go. Done, it's assigned to track 15. I'm going to clear the sample buffer. And now if I go into keyboard mode, let me select track 15. There's the sample I played. So I'll go ahead, we're on the first step of the first bar, I'll drop a trigger. I've got my triggers already set up to be, actually this one's not, let's make this 128 steps, which is 8 bars. So now when I press play, oops, This brings me to another feature I like about the Digitakt I forgot to do. You have global mutes and per pattern mutes. So if you want, you can assign separate mutes for every single one of your patterns. I had the pattern mute for track 15 on, unfortunately. One of those things to remember, but we'll unmute the pattern mute, go back to global mutes, and now if I press play, you can hear track 15 is playing that 8-bar loop I recorded. Unfortunately, one of the downsides of using like one-shot triggers and just a single trigger is that when I'm playing live, let's say I want to go ahead and, okay, I want to mute this sound. Well, if I hit mute, it keeps playing because the mutes on the Digitakt work on the note. It'll mute the MIDI note that triggers a sample. It doesn't actually mute the audio, which I like, but unfortunately it means that, if I wanted to mute that track, I'd have to wait for the pattern loop all the way back around to start before it would actually mute. And the same goes for unmuting. Say if I want to unmute that track on the beginning of bar 5, I can't because it hasn't actually hit the trigger state yet on the first step. So what we're going to do is use the grid machine instead of using the one-shot machine. So for track 15, we'll go in and hit function and source to select our different machines. They added a bunch of different like stretch machines, warp machines, repitch. I use grid exclusively. My entire live set is based on the grid machine, and I'll show you why. So now I've set this one track to use the grid machine. And so instead of having one trigger, I'm going to go and drop a bunch more triggers in every 8th note. I'll copy that sequencer page, paste it to the rest of the sequencer pages. So now it's basically triggering the first 8th note of my sample every single time a trigger is placed on these steps, which we don't want. So we'll change the grid to 64th. So this will slice up my sample into 64 slices, and then while you're on the source page, you hit yes, and you can create linear locks. So it'll assign sequential slices from the sample to every single note trigger. So there you go, I get basically my 8-bar loop, but I have the control to mute things now if I want. I can mute or unmute things. It's also nice I can do like amplifier envelope tricks. So I can take this pad and make it nice and staccato if I wanted. So yeah, it gives you a little bit more flexibility when performing live. I'm not stuck with like having to wait like a full 8 bars to mute or unmute samples or change them up. The other nice thing about using the grid machine that I like, and this is something I did on the Octatrack all the time because the Octatrack has this functionality, is that again, instead of creating linear locks where it assigns the slices in a sample sequentially, you can randomize your locks. So it'll randomly assign slices. So let's see, just hit yes. And you can just keep doing this, assigning random slices until you find something you like. So again, just one of those ways, it's fun to kind of brainstorm and come up with fun ideas, and you're not stuck with like leaving like a rigid 8th grid. You can place the triggers wherever you want and then randomize it. So you can come up with some really interesting melodies that way. And again, every single one of my tracks on the Digitakt 2 for my live sets uses the grid machine just because it gives me that kind of flexibility. One of the other things I like about Digitact is how many ways you have to kind of affect your sounds in real time and then get back to a save state. So let me demonstrate. Let's fix this amp envelope. And go back to make it sound the way it was, linear locks. So let's say I wanted to high pass filter all the tracks while I'm performing. I can do that pretty easily. I can go to the filter page, hold down track, and while you hold on track, any parameter you change will affect all the tracks at once. You can go to your effects page, add a bunch of delay and reverb. So this is a great way to make like a build up. Just gotta remember to hold the track button down, and then while you're holding track, if you want to go back to what it was before, just hit no. And it'll cancel all those changes. There's another way you can do this too, is that right now I can save the state of my pattern as playing. If I hold function and yes, it'll save the pattern to a temporary area. And now I don't have to hold track. I can just go in and affect tracks individually. So let's say I want to add a bunch of delay to my percussion tracks. And then on my pad track here, I want to filter things with a low pass filter. Just for demonstration, I'm making some crazy build or whatever. Now I want to come out of that. It will function no. And you go right back to what the save state of the pattern was. So that's really, really useful for live use to have both those methods of doing that. You know, I can hold track and affect all the tracks at once if I turn on the knob, or I can get a little more detailed and just choose which parameters I want to affect on a per track basis and then snap right out of it at the end of a drop, or, you know, whatever your use might be. I touched on already that we also have per pattern muting, these purple buttons, these purple lights. You can save pattern mutes on a per pattern basis, or you can do a global pattern muting. I tend to use this more for live performance. It's just nice knowing that when I switch patterns, the mutes will stay the same, the mute states. The other thing you might have seen is we actually have multiple filter types on a per track basis. So right now I'm on track 15. We have a low pass filter. I'm sorry, this is a state variable filter. You can do low pass to band pass to high pass, kind of like an SEM filter. But if you want just a standard low pass filter, you can hold function in machine, just choose the low pass 4 filter. There's an equalizer, there's a comb filter. So you have different filter types you can choose for the main filter. In addition to that, there's a secondary filter on each track, which is kind of the typical Elektron bass width filter. So you can do like a high pass and low pass, in addition to also using the main filter for a track. This is great because, say, like on a bass line, you know, I can use the main low pass 4 filter to create like a really deep and subby bass line, but maybe it's generating tons of like subharmonic information, or just, you know, subs in general that make the mix sound muddy or burying the kick drum. Well, I can just pick this filter, the second filter, and just high pass that track to get rid of that. So you can use one filter for sound design and one filter for basically like mixing duties. So from like a live performance standpoint, again, that's really useful, just giving me different options for how I want to affect the sound, and also being able to like really dial in the sound so that I don't have to rely on, like, you know, separate box for EQ and compression on the master just to make things sound nice and clean. Speaking of that, there's also a global compressor on the device, which I like a lot. Here's the compressor. You got your typical compressor settings: threshold, attack, release, makeup, gain, set the ratio. It's got a sidechain functionality. You can define like which one of the tracks will affect the sidechain, or if all of them affect it. You've got a sidechain filter. And then for me, the thing I like the most too, it's got a dry-wet balance for the compressor. I like using compressor a lot, but I kind of do like New York style compression, where I don't just compress the signal, I'll blend in some dry back so you still get some transient information. So I find that's really useful. Again, it just means I don't have to bring a separate box just to, you know, apply some global dynamics control. I can do it all within the Digitakt itself, which for live use is great. The less I have to bring, the best. Kind of the last thing that really I like a lot more than I expected is just the fill functionality you have on the Digitakt. They moved all the different trig parameters. You can do things like per step ratcheting. You can do probability, like will step play like every other time the pattern loops, every 3 times, things like that. This was in previous Elektron devices, but they've moved all that onto one page now. They've also moved the fill functionality here. So you can have like a fill mode where if you hold down page, any fill parameters you set with this, so I won't go through and set it up right now, but any fill parameters will get triggered while you hold down this fill page button. So let me just demonstrate that. So I've got fill set up for my drums. So this is my drum loop, and I've got fill set on bar 8 when I press the page button down. So here, that last little change up on bar 8, it's just something I pre-programmed. And basically the way it works is like while you hold down the fill button, you know, you can press a step and decide, will that step play when you hold the fill button down? Or if you've got like notes that are already playing, you can make it so when you press the fill button, those notes won't play. So it just gives you a nice way to kind of mix things up in real time. Takes these 8-bar patterns, give you some variations so it's not so repetitive. Let's see, what else do I like about the Digitakt? Yes, backup and some of the file functionality is really easy on the Digitakt. They have a transfer software you can use with a laptop. I'm not going to use a screen recording to show you that right now. You can see that online. The transfer software works great. It's painfully slow, unfortunately. To get samples to the Digitakt or to back up your projects, it uses like an old school MIDI SDS dump. So, you know, you've got like 20 gigs of samples you can load onto this device, but that's something you probably would have to do before you'd have to start before you go to bed and come back in the morning before it'd be finished. It's really, really slow. But on the plus side, it's been super stable. I have no problems with it. And what I really like is if you want to back up your projects, like all the samples used in that project are stored in the project file. So it's just one file you have to grab off the device and put it on your laptop. And then you know if you ever load it back on the device, it'll always work. The other thing I like about the Digitakt is some of the file functionality they added. So let's say I go in my samples menu, I can go in my project RAM. And now let's say I've recorded, like as I'm writing like a live set, you know, there's a lot of times I'll record multiple loops and decide, oh, later on that loop doesn't work, you know, and instead of having that just kind of cluttered up my, you know, my RAM and having to figure out like on a sample by sample basis if something's been used or not, there's an option here to like go down and hit select unused. If there's any samples that aren't being used in the project, it'll highlight those, and then you can and put it here in this other column, and then you can go into unload down here, and you can unload them from the project RAM, and then resave your project. So it's a good way to clear out samples you aren't using, and you can do it without having to actually like go through and like write down all the samples you're using on a project by project basis. Just a nice quick way to kind of get rid of things you're not using and make your sample transfers a little bit easier. Again, it's one of those things that, like, you know, you don't think you need until you start using it. And then once you start using it, you're like, wow, this saves me a lot of time. I'm really glad Elektron added that in there. So that's an overview of some of the stuff I like the most about the Elektron Digitakt 2. Hopefully that wasn't too long-winded or rambling. And to keep things short, let's kind of step back and wrap things up. Okay, so that was a sort of quick walkthrough of the Elektron Digitakt 2. Like I said, there's a lot of things in there that I didn't quite expect going into this. I didn't really have any expectations. I mostly bought the Digitakt 2 out of curiosity, having never owned the smaller Elektron boxes, only their bigger units. And I've been pleasantly surprised. As I mentioned, I think Elektron's really learned from a lot of their previous boxes and kind of really refined the workflow and some ease of use features that just make using it quite fun. I didn't expect that sampling on it would be so quick and intuitive, so much so that I even went out and bought a small keyboard just so I could have something nice and portable to sample from more easily. As a live performance tool, it's definitely exceeded all my expectations. I love the Octatrack, and that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, but the Digitakt definitely gives me quite a bit more flexibility, at least for how I want to do my sets these days, and will be kind of the core of my live setups going forward. I had bought this with the intention of kind of creating a new live set for 2025 for this summer here in my local town. I like to get a lot of gigs, you know, and I've been using the same Octatrack sets for a few years now. I wanted something new. I expected it would take me all winter on the Digitakt to come up with enough material to have enough for a 2-hour set like I perform here. And actually within a couple months, 2-3 months, you know, it's only beginning of January and I'm already ready to go. So, you know, it was just that quick and easy for me to write on the Digitakt and kind of like find my way around and get a workflow that works for me for live use. And I didn't really quite expect that, so I'm pleasantly surprised. So overall, yeah, I'm very happy with it. I think Elektron did a great job. Like I said, you know, they've learned a lot from their previous boxes and people's comments, and I think they've applied a lot of that to the Digitakt 2 to make the workflow very fast and intuitive. It doesn't have every bell and whistle everybody wants, and I'm okay with that. And I think for now, it's a good compromise. You know, it doesn't cost $2,000. You know, it's a little bit cheaper than some other options out there, but you still get a lot of functionality, and you get a very, very quick and intuitive workflow, which I think says a lot about this unit. So that's it. I'm pretty impressed, and I can't wait to use it more going forward. As always with these videos, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the comments below and I'll get to them when I can. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next video, and thanks for watching this one. I'll talk to you later.